Lisa, miss 50 lines only. Okay, we are live now. Hello, everybody. We're here. We're going to be quiet for a little while and do some sharing on Facebook for reasons that you all are very familiar with. And so please help us out on both YouTube and Facebook. And we'll be with you shortly. Help us out. I don't know what's wrong with my scroll bar today on the sharing application. I can't seem to get it to work. So, I think at this point, if it's okay with you, Sherry, we will start. Hello, Sherry. It looks like Sherry has frozen a little bit. Kay says, wow, got a notice again. Hi, all glad to see you. So here we are. I think Sherry has frozen. So she may have to come back in. But let's say hi while she's doing that. And Laura says, good evening, everyone. And Lisa Girl says, hello, Joe. Web looking forward to this all day. Sherry Wise. Lisa says, been waiting all day for this. Amber says, hello, my lovelies. Hi, Amber. And Dolores on Facebook says, good evening, everyone. She already said that on YouTube, since she stays on both. And Amber says, hi on Facebook. And Dolores is sharing. Thank you, Dolores. And Sherry has come in with a new instance. And I'm going to add her to the stream. And there she is. I now have 2 instances of you. Oh, now I've got only 1. That's excellent. I'm glad to have only 1 because that's the right one. So hi, we are now live. And I'm glad to see that you made it back.
I think I'm a first.
I don't think so. I think we got it right this time. Kay says, wow, got a notice again. Hi, all glad to see you. Jeff Denton says, yeah, I shared. Thank you, Jeff. And Kay has also shared. So thank you all. And we're going to start. And my guest for tonight is Sherry Wise. And Sherry Wise is an economist who has more than 30 years of experience working in environmental and agricultural economics. She has an MS degree and a PhD in economics from Iowa State University and has worked in academics, government, and consulting. She's interested in modern monetary theory, antitrust, and healthcare. I detected a sound while I was going through that introduction, which indicates that Sherry has to be added to the stream again, but here she is. So yep. She's back again. Okay, so now, having introduced her and introduced you to her very impressive credentials and background, I'm going to turn the con over to Sherry. And she's going to start talking some antitrust and some healthcare. And also public financing for public purpose. So thank you, Sherry. Please go ahead.
Sure. Well, what I wanted to do was start out. I have a series of articles that I published with Beyond the Spectrum. And even though it's taking me quite a while, I still have 3 more articles to finish up that will kind of bring us up to today and what's going on and how we might change things. But basically what has happened...
hang on for just a second, Sherry. Mm-hmm. Amber, if you can post the links to those articles in the comments, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So, what happened was, of course, in the 1900s, we had, really after the economy blew up and, it really grew a lot. And after the Civil War, we really kind of developed into an industrial society. And of course, we had, along with that, with the robber barons and John Rockefeller and all those guys. And, they engaged in a lot of really kind of abusive patterns. And I'm in agriculture. One of the things that happened then was the farmers had really a lot of trouble with shipping grain to the East Coast. And so there was a lot of upheaval that was going on in the country in the late 1800s. And so what happened was in 1890, John Sherman, who was William Tecumseh Sherman's brother, he was a senator, and he and some other, people got together and they hammered out, after a couple of years, this Sherman antitrust law. So we had the antitrust law, but they didn't really kind of know what to do with it. It was kind of a vague thing. And so for the first 10 years, it really wasn't used except against labor unions, of all things.
Yeah.
And
Of course, of course. What
yeah.
else?
Yep. So then what happened was in the early 1900s, we had this big progressive movement that kind of was also accompanied by the Grange movement in the Midwest, and then we had the muckrakers like Ida Tarbell and Upton Sinclair writing books and writing articles telling the American people about all these terrible practices. And so that really got people motivated to try to get more done with respect to regulation of food and antitrust. So in the early 1900s, we had a couple more acts that were passed: the Clayton Act and then the Federal Trade Act, which set up the Federal Trade Commission. And so that they started to put teeth into antitrust. But what happened was we had World War I, and World War I just kind of destroyed the progressive movement because everything was focused on the war, and a lot of it was really about trying to convince the American people to go to war because we were kind of resistant. And that's, of course, when a lot of these propaganda techniques began. But so after the war, really, America just kind of, settled back into a sort of business as usual kind of setting. The progressive movement was dead. And well, we all know what happened in the 20s and then the Great Depression. And but also what was going on in the federal government was that there really wasn't like an institutional structure in the federal government for there to be effective regulation of a lot of things. Because basically we had Congress, we had the presidency, and we had the Supreme Court, but we didn't have much of an administrative, part of the government.
Yes.
And so, like there wasn't really like what we now would consider the bureaucracy. And it wasn't until the Great Depression and the New Deal that really started to develop. And it was FDR that really built up the administrative part of the government. And so and of course that was because all these programs with the New Deal. And but as part of that, he hired a man by the name of Thurman Arnold, who was a lawyer. And Thurman Arnold headed up the antitrust division. And for the first time, Thurman Arnold really wanted to take this stuff seriously. And so the Federal Trade Commission and Department of Justice, and Thurman Arnold was at the Department of Justice, they really started focusing in on looking at the issue of monopoly and competition issues. And this was, in the 30s. So what was also going on was Joan Robinson and Chamberlain. I can't remember his first name. Was it William or Richard? Richard, I think. No, it wasn't Richard.
Richard Chamberlain or Neville Chamberlain.
Huh?
During the 1930s, during the 1930s, the Prime Minister, of England in the latter part of the 1930s was actually Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Okay.
But this was an American who wrote. Huh? I'm sorry.
Right. Okay. So was that the Chamberlain? That you meant?
Yeah. I meant it was an economist by the name of Chamberlain, and I can't remember his first name. But he was working on Imperfect Competition. At the same time, Joan Robinson was working on Imperfect Competition over in England. And right around the same time, they published a very similar kind of book, and it was completely independent. But they really started to look at the economics of what happens when you have industries that are not perfectly competitive. And that was really the first we kind of had an economic theory of that. And so through the 1930s and the 1940s and into the 1950s, in the field of economics, that field kind of became in and of itself. That became a field in and of itself called industrial organization. And yeah, and so they, this was the development of the thinking about, well, what does it mean to have imperfect competition? What kinds of firms are imperfectly competitive? How do they react? How do they strategize? How do they price? Things like that. What are their markets like? And as that was going on, then at the same time, in the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, they started really actually taking cases to court, and serious cases to court. So one of the big ones was Alcoa, and that was a vertical integration case. And yeah, so because they owned the bauxite, and they were just really they were a tough company. And in fact, Reynolds Aluminum was formed by the U.S. government because Alcoa wouldn't be reasonable about trying to get airplanes and stuff, aluminum for airplanes in World War II. So anyway, that continued to develop, and by the 1960s, we sort of had a body of work. But at the same time, well, early on, since we didn't have an administrative thing, when there were a few antitrust cases that came forward, it was really sort of the judiciary that really started to develop antitrust law, the interpretations and things like that. And so it was.
So a question about that one.
Yeah.
With respect to the judiciary, okay, I suppose that the judiciary in the early teens of the 20th century, okay, and the 1920s was probably very, very unfriendly to antitrust law, right?
Yep.
And then
very much so.
But then it became a lot more friendly when Roosevelt started to make appointments to the Supreme Court. Okay, is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
So by 1945 or so, there was a lot of law that had been interpreted by the judiciary in a favorable way to antitrust.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And it kind of started. It started with Louis Brandeis. And he was actually appointed to the Supreme Court by Woodrow Wilson. And Louis Brandeis was actually an anti-big government person, but he was very pro small business, and so he kind of started to set a lot of the tone. And then Frankfurter.
You're thinking of Frankfurter.
Huh?
I said you're thinking of Felix Frankfurter.
Oh, yeah, him.
Felix.
Yeah, and there was there were some other ones. Oh, Holmes. Wait, no, not one. Anyway, but there were several other, as you said, there were appointments that FDR started to make, and they actually were more sympathetic because FDR wanted to appoint those people. But in addition, sort of the mood of the country had really changed too, and so they kind of were sort of reflecting what was going on in the country as well. And so, throughout the 1940s and 1950s, that was really a period of a lot of activism at the court on the, not just at the DOJ, but also the court was setting a lot of it. And it was much more friendly to looking at competition issues than previous courts have been.
Right, and
And so
also, that court also was much more anti-corporate than what we started to see during the 1970s and 1980s, correct?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yep. And so what happened was, in the 1960s, an economist by the name of I can't think of his name. Donald Turner. He came into the DOJ, and he was actually an economist and a lawyer, like one of the first people that was actually doing that. And so he wanted to kind of restore some kind. He wanted to bring economics in a little more concretely. And so they created what they called the merger guidelines. And that helped kind of define okay. So we did all back. You can hear me?
Yes, we could hear you again now. But there's a tendency to freeze. Okay, I think you're frozen now, and you may have to come in again. Okay, so it looks like Sherry, is a little frozen, but she's taken us up to the 19th. Oh, here she is again. Okay, thanks.
Yep. So anyway, what happened was under Donald Turner, the Department of Justice put out the merger guidelines, and they're not, and they're not like a legal rule. But and I'm not quite sure. Actually, I would need to talk to somebody like a lawyer to find out. I'm kind of a little, I don't really understand what their status is in terms of like administrative law, because I don't think they're a rule making. But they do seem like the recent years when they've changed them, they've gone out for public comment and everything. So they're a little more. They're more than just like a guideline. I mean, they're basically telling the American people and American businesses, when there's mergers, this is how we're gonna look at the market aspect of a merger, and so it's also informative, and at that point in time, the merger guidelines were really kind of based on market share. So if two firms with pretty good sized market share were trying to merge, that would cause a concern, and that would be an issue for the DOJ or the FTC, depending on what the jurisdiction is, for them to step in, and they may say, no, this merger can't happen, or they may say this merger can happen, but only under certain conditions. So maybe you have to shed some other businesses or something like that. So, but it was basically the thing that kicked it off was how big was the market share of these two firms that are merging, and they really stayed away. And that's what there's two kinds of mergers that economists talk about. There's horizontal mergers and vertical mergers. And horizontal mergers are when two companies that are in the same industry, same kind, they're basically like competing firms or sort of competing firms, when they get together. And so those two, when horizontal mergers happen like that, basically you end up with one firm with a much bigger market share. There's another kind of merger, and it has been like especially since the 40s, the government was always kind of resistant about this kind, and it's called vertical merger. And a vertical merger is, for instance, well, chicken is a good example. The chicken industry right now is mostly vertically or integrated. And so what you have is you have packing companies that also own feed mills, and they also own hatcheries. And so basically they own different steps of a production process. And so in a sense, a completely vertically integrated firm would be able to, start right from the beginning of the production of an item, all the way down to, and take it all the way through the supply chain or production chain and the supply chain, and get it out to market. And so right now the poultry industry is mostly vertically integrated, with the exception of chicken producers. And right now there's actually some rules that are being revised that actually address that issue. So anyway, vertical integration was something, and the issue with Alcoa back in the 40s, Alcoa was vertically integrated because they owned bauxite, which was an important material that went into the production of aluminum. And so it doesn't necessarily seem like a bad thing maybe at first, because you can certainly get a lot of economic efficiencies. But the problem is, you can have, at the same time, you can have an industry, like a company like Alcoa, if it has a controlling market share of an input, then that means any other competitors or potential competitors would have to buy from them. And so it creates this whole, these distorted incentives. And in fact, an aggressive monopolizing firm would intentionally be trying to, shut rivals out or raise their costs. So vertical integration is something that is certainly through the 40s, 50s, and 60s was very the administrations and the DOJ, FTC were very much against that. So then what happened was we had the rise of neoliberals.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, which you know all about. So what happened was Milton Friedman, who was the leading economist at the University of Chicago at the time in the 70s, he was very famous, and he worked with a lot of other economists in have you heard, do you know about the Mont Pelerin Society?
Absolutely, I know about the Mont Pelerin Society.
Yeah. So one of the things that they decided to take on in as a particular project in the Mont Pelerin Society was antitrust, looking at antitrust. And so along came a graduate student by the name of Robert Bork, and he really glommed on to this issue. And in the 60s, he started writing in the 60s, but it wasn't until the 1970s that he put out his book, The Antitrust Paradox. And basically, he was saying that um, antitrust, the way it's practiced in the United States, was really not it was not working for consumers. That basically the way we conducted it was too supportive of, like, trying to keep businesses, existing businesses going, and at the same time, not being able to realize a lot of the efficiencies that a production process might have. So specifically what he was talking about is, if you don't let big companies, if you don't let companies get big enough to realize economies of scale, you're going to have inefficient production. And that's going to lead to high prices for consumers.
Right. And basically, in the case of the companies that, are vertically integrated,
Mm-hmm.
Those are very large companies that, in theory, can produce lower prices for consumers across the board, right? Because at
Right.
each level of the vertical integration,
Mm-hmm.
they're able to lower costs and therefore
Right.
eventually pass through a lower price to consumers. And
Right.
so the argument is that from the consumer point of view, it's best not to enforce the antitrust laws, right, against vertical integration. That was the argument, correct?
Yeah, that was his argument. But it wasn't just for vertical integration, it was also for horizontal integration.
Oh,
He,
okay. You can't do
yeah,
horizontal antitrust either.
yeah, he was against antitrust, period. And for horizontal, he was basically saying, well, plants can get big enough to realize economies of scale, and if that's the case, then prices for consumers can be lower. And if you have mergers, well, then two firms can merge and they can realize a lot of efficiencies between them. So in other words, they can get rid of redundant people. A lot of, like, it sort of trim the duplication and things like that in expenses. And so that was sort of what he was arguing for. And so what he meant, so what happened was, previously, there's the philosophy sort of antitrust regulation and antitrust judicial law, case law. The emphasis was, we're going to try to preserve competition, right? So we want to try to make sure that there's no one big company or a few big companies totally dominating the market, so that there's no ability for new entrants to come in, or you're not putting the small guys out of business and things like that. So certainly the issue, it wasn't supposed to be about protecting inefficiency, but the idea was protecting competition. And but what Bork did, and he was really, really clever in the way he did this, is he said, no, let's make it about consumers. And Matt Stoller, who I think know who he is, he wrote a book called
Yes, I do. I know Matt, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and he wrote a great book, and I recommend it to anybody who's interested in this, called Goliath. And it is, basically the history of antitrust. And he talks about, what Matt did was talk about how in the 1960s, we had a lot of revolutionary thinking in the 1960s. Of course, we had the student revolts against the war, but we also had the environmental movement. We had civil rights. We had women's rights. The beginning of the gay rights movement. And there was also a lot of concern about consumers and trying to protect consumers. And this was really a pretty new thing in this country, for there to have I mean, yeah, there was interest in it, you know, back in the days of the progressives, but this was really kind of, you know, fighting more for consumers to have more rights and concerns about that. And so what happened was Bork really kind of tapped into that mentality. And at the same time, there was also the Powell Amendment coming out, and you know, and so basically, what was happening is you had in 1960s, you had all these kind of forces that were very democratic and progressive coming along, and then in the 1970s, you had a lot of reaction against that.
Indeed.
And Bork, yeah, and so Bork's arguments worked really well. On behalf of the, you know, the people that were reacting against that, but at the same time, they still had some appeal to people because he was trying to make it about the consumers. Now, that's the theory that he was making about consumers. It really wasn't necessarily about consumers, but he kind of made it sound that way. So what happened was he wrote the Antitrust Paradox, and by the late 1970s, Lewis Powell, who wrote the memo, he was by then on the Supreme Court.
Yes,
and yeah, and so what happened was the courts, you know, including Lewis Powell as a Supreme Court justice, started to take Bork's arguments seriously. And so, you know, this was by the late 1970s, they actually started saying, well, you know, let's look at this. And then they brought it up in cases. And what really turned the whole thing around was Reagan getting elected. And in 1982, when Reagan got elected, after Reagan got elected, in 1984, they released a brand new set of merger guidelines, and they completely revamped the way merger guidelines had been, had been administered in the past, and they made it more about the arguments that Bork was using. So, for the first time, economists really the economists really started driving a lot of the decisions in merger analyses in a way that they hadn't ever before. So what has happened is, as a result of this, we have allowed more and more and more mergers. We've had increasingly more mergers, and we have companies that have just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So, for example, like in the field I'm in the livestock industry, in 1921 they passed the Packers and Stockyards Act. The Packers and Stockyards Act is basically like kind of a little antitrust act specifically for the livestock industry, and it was inspired by Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle. And so the idea was to reduce the power of the meat packers, because you had like 5 of them that owned 80% of the market. Well, we're really back to that same place now. So you know, there's basically 4 companies that own 80% of the beef packing in this country. The poultry industry, the top ones own like 70%. Pork packers, same thing. But this has happened all over the country. And so we've had increasingly larger and larger and larger firms, more and more mergers. And the problem is that it's more than just that we have big companies now. The problem is this has really contributed to these other factors that we have that have really been pushing pushing us towards more and more and more inequality, economic inequality. And so the fact that all these firms in these many industries all over the economy, that they are so big and so powerful that it's really hard for young people, for new businesses to get started in most industries, and it kind of it exacerbated the pay differential between workers and executives. And then, of course, in my opinion, the even worse thing of all is that it made it much more economically feasible for these companies to be able to spend massive amounts of money lobbying and affecting congressional and, well, all the political decisions in this country. And so to me, and I think this is something that was understood when I was a kid in the 1960s, economic power is a danger, not just because of the economic implications, but also because of the political implications.
Yes.
And we have just really been seeing this ever since. So,
yeah, there was a political scientist, very famous. He became very famous during the 1940s and 1950s. His name was Laswell, Harold Laswell. And his work focused on what he called, well, he focused on important values in society. Okay, power was one, okay, of those values. Okay, and from his point of view, there were different kinds, okay, of power. And once you had one kind of power, and you could exercise that to also gain power, okay, in other kinds of power. In other words, he called it actually the agglutination, okay, of power. He was very jargonistic, okay, and very technical, okay, in his writing. He was very popular, okay, among the professional political scientists, but not really very famous, okay, among everybody else. But he had insights about how power spilled over, okay, into other spheres. And of course, he directed the attention of political scientists to the study of influence, okay, and power. And there was also C. Wright Mills in sociology during the 1940s, okay, and 1950s, who wrote a book called he wrote two books actually that were very important. One was The White Collar, and that was about how essentially bureaucrats were taking over the business world, and small businesses were losing power to large businesses. And that was a book that was extremely influential in the same way The Organization Man was, because it described the culture of these very large businesses that were gaining more and more power in the country. Then his second book was The Power Elite. That was an enormously popular book during the latter part of the 1950s, okay, and 1960s. And what that was about was he looked at the economy as divided into sectors, and the elites of those sectors, okay, is running things. And he talked about the commanding heights, okay, of the economy, and how there were elites from the military sector, okay, and elites from the business the sector, okay, and the political elites, and how they all came together to run things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It wasn't so apparent during the 1950s and 1960s that he was right. And the reason why was because there were counter theories about how um, but the multiplicity of interest groups inside of the United
Mm-hmm.
States was creating a new type of a political system characterized by bargaining, okay, and by compromise. And the political
Mm-hmm.
parties were the aggregators of all of these interest groups. And these interest groups were always competing with each other. You know, the elites were shifting, the hierarchies, okay, were shifting. So there was no power elite, supposedly, that was actually governing the country.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
those were convincing arguments during parts of the 1960s, actually all the 1960s, okay, in the 1970s. And the
Mm-hmm.
view of C. Wright Mills was eclipsed, actually, during that time. Only the radicals believed him because it looked as though reality was very, very different,
Mm-hmm.
indeed. However, as the neoliberals rose and how the uh, uh, when you had more and more the development of these extremely large organizations and the accretion of power, okay, of the military-industrial complex uh, over time, and of course the ideology, okay, the neoliberalism strengthening all this, and the breakdown, okay, of antitrust efforts here in the
Yeah.
United States, it becomes more and more clear that a power elite was emerging in the United States.
Yep.
You could look at certain key industries like the pharmaceutical industry, the health
Mm-hmm.
insurance industry, the military industrial complex, again, the oil industry, and later, of course, the information technology industry, and
Mm-hmm.
the emergence of extremely large corporations, okay, in that industry. And then you see the donors situation changing with respect to donors giving free rein to produce enormous quantities of money for the politicians. And
Yep.
you see that in the long run, it appears Mills was right, and the forces were there to create a power elite in the United States. And this power elite destroyed the power of antitrust to hold them in check over a
Yep.
period of time.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I take it this is your thesis too as to what happened.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And and right now there's a lot of books that have come out. It's kind of funny because I first became aware of this in like the mid 2000s. I was working at the Packers and Stockyards program at that point in time, and there were a lot of meat packing companies that were merging and getting bought out. And I knew that there was, I had taken industrial organization when I was an undergrad, so I knew that there was an antitrust act that was still on the books. And so I was just thinking, how can this even continue to happen? Um, and, you know, and
How
so,
could it
so
happen?
so I started, looking into it, and then I found out about the history of Bork and all this stuff, and you know, and unfortunately, most economists have bought into this thing, and
Oh yeah,
so I find it so bizarre because you know economics usually is teaching about competition and no you don't want control over prices and all this kind of stuff, but somehow when it comes to antitrust they're like, oh well, okay, consumers can benefit, and we don't even know for sure that consumers can, because Bork came up with a theory that consumers could. There was nothing in the theory that said they had to. And
yeah, right.
so,
And the level of empirical evidence showing that they actually benefited was not clear, right?
Right. Right.
Okay, and
And
also there's a difficulty in terms of the temporality, okay, of everything, because it certainly might be
mhm,
possible for consumers to benefit from some greater degree of efficiency at the start, but once that causes an industry to consolidate, okay, and to develop again,
yep,
okay, power elite, then what happens to consumer pricing? At that point,
exactly.
what happens to consumer
Right.
pricing?
Right. And the thing of it is it's not just consumer prices. Choices get limited. I mean, you go into the grocery store and you go down the cereal lane and it looks like there's all these different kinds of cereals. But when it comes down to it, there's a few stragglers, maybe, that are maybe in organics and stuff like that. But maybe some local brands or something that a grocery store might carry, or they'll do their own their store generic brand. But for the most part, it's like three cereal makers. And so they're just doing the same, they just kind of do. I mean, you don't have a choice, um, because they just basically dictate what's going to be on the market. And so you think you have choice, but you really don't have choice. And another thing is they do all kinds of terrible things that people just aren't aware of. So for instance, you know, package sizes change. I mean, and
They just get a little bit smaller. They look like they're the same size, okay, as they used to be. The price can be the same, but the package
mhm,
size is a little smaller. So actually, the price per
yeah,
ounce has gone up, and it's a little
right,
hard
right,
to realize because you don't recognize that the packaging uh, has actually changed in terms of number of ounces. Okay, you're getting so. There has to be all kinds of
yeah,
rationality on the part of consumers to make that choice. It requires close study by the consumers as to what is happening, and these
hmm,
businesses have the power to actually manipulate the consumers into thinking they're getting a good deal.
yeah,
Okay, and of course,
exactly.
we've known about this uh, since books by John Kenneth Galbraith, okay, appeared
Hmm.
during the
Right.
1950s and 1960s, where he talked about the power of business, okay, to manipulate. That
Right.
was the kind of power they were using, and that it was very effective in actually controlling consumers. So, do consumers really have choice? Is there
Right.
really choice in that
Right.
kind of market? And so he raised that question all the way back then. But it's a question that people haven't kept asking over the years. They've
Hmm.
accepted the idea that they do have choices. Okay, just a little bit of
Hmm.
experience, okay, of myself, kind of recently. We have a different kind of diet. It's an anti cancer diet. So we don't eat any red meat. So
Hmm.
it's been years since we've eaten one of our favorite dishes, which is lamb shanks.
Hmm.
Okay, I have a very good recipe for that, and I can cook it well. Bonnie really likes it. So she made a special request, okay, for our anniversary, which is coming up in just a few days. It's our 55th. She asked me if I could
Congratulations.
make us, thank you very much, some lamb shanks. Okay, and so I said, sure, I can do that. And so this week we went to our local markets that we normally go to try to find some lamb shanks.
Hmm.
No lamb shanks around. First of all, it's mostly beef or pork.
Hmm.
Okay, but even
Hmm.
if they have lamb, it's chops. They might have some stew. They might have some ground lamb, and they might have some roast lamb. But
Mm-mm.
God damn it, if they have any lamb shanks, there are
Hmm.
no lamb shanks around. Who made the
Yeah.
decision that there won't be lamb shanks now? So, I mean, where's the choice if you can't get any
Hmm.
lamb shanks?
Right. Right.
Now, that's a
Yeah.
popular dish, okay, in many restaurants, but consumers to have it at home, it's a little hard to get. Now, finally, we did find some lamb shanks at Wegmans, okay?
Uh-huh.
The damn things were $8 a pound. Now I remember just a few years ago at Shoppers Food Warehouse, you could get lamb shanks for like $3.50 a pound. What
Hmm.
happened to the prices? I don't know, but I know choices have changed. They had nothing to do with
Yep.
my choices, I don't think. Okay,
Right.
but somehow the markets kind of got changed. It probably has to do with the concentration of the meat packers
Oh,
and what they're selling, okay,
yeah.
to people. So that kind of thing is happening, okay, and is going on. It's restricting our choices.
Yeah.
But you are going to talk tonight some about how the concentrations, okay, and how the monopolies affect our healthcare system and our
Hmm.
healthcare choices. So
Yeah.
please talk about that. It's very
Okay.
important.
Okay. Just one thing, one point I want to make before I get start there. Um, it goes more than one way with respect to monopolization. So a lot of a lot of the changes that have happened in the food distribution system have come about because of the concentration that's come about in the retail on the retail end. And so Walmart Walmart calls the shots for a lot of what gets sold. Walmart wanted to get rid of butchers, so everything came. They pushed case. They basically told the packers, we want case ready meats, and so now they don't have. Grocery stores for the most part don't have butchers. They just have stuff that comes already in a tray pack that just gets put on the shelf or in the cooler. So a lot of these calls, a lot of the decisions that have been made have not been made just by on the side of the producer or the wholesaler or the manufacturer. A lot of it comes because of concentration in the on the end stage of the supply chain. So a lot of it is
Concentration in the retail market.
exactly, yeah. Walmart has really, really called the shots with a lot of the stuff that you buy. And yeah, so there has been, there's a lot of market power on Walmart's part. And they're the biggest, but they're not the only ones. So anyway, okay, so with health insurance. Well, health insurance, there's so many ways that the problem of monopoly comes up in the health insurance industry. Um, for one thing, health insurance, or not just health. I'm sorry, not just health insurance. The entire health care industry. Um, First of all, we have, of course, the pharmaceutical companies. They are given the right to have a monopoly in the patent system. And so, of course, they use the excuse. I mean, I'm sure it does take a long time typically for drugs to go through the Food and Drug Administration, get proven. But they use that to get extensions on their monopolies. And A lot of the research they don't even do themselves, but it's from the government, um, and but they're able to um, to basically get patents on things, sometimes that are just like a mere tweak, in a chemical formulation. Um, they also tend to want to go for the biggest sellers. So they don't, for instance, maybe want to put work into a a drug for maybe a neurological condition that's very rare, but they'll put money into developing Viagra. And so, there's a lot of control by the pharmaceutical industries. They have a monopoly that is government granted in the patent system, and the the arguments that they use to justify the patent are not necessarily as valid as it might seem, given that they say it's for research, but a lot of the research is funded by the public sector, and so this is something that is a serious problem in as we all know, and of course they abuse their monopoly power constantly, especially in this country, with the outrageous prices that they charge for prescriptions. So, but that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. For health insurance, one of the things that's unusual about health insurance is that it's typically regulated at the state level, and so not all states have the same health insurance companies, and so you might have health insurance companies that exist in just one state, and some of these states, like we lived in New Mexico and in Iowa, and both of those states didn't really have a lot of choice. I mean, there were some choices, but there wasn't a lot of choice for health insurance companies, and so you're limited in that. But health insurance is so incredibly tricky in the way that they price things, because they really make it one of the real disadvantages in pricing with the monopoly is they can do all kinds of things to sort of milk the as much out of you as they can. So they can put charge different prices. It's called price discrimination to different groups. And then also, with the health insurance companies, they're just so vague about the costs. There's so many ways that they can hide what the true costs are to you as a consumer, because you get the premiums, but then so you might know the premiums, but what does that mean in terms of benefits? Benefits change, all this kind of stuff, and so
yes, and the changes. The changes, that occur to benefits, are arbitrary and not very visible to you as the consumer. So the consumer doesn't actually benefit and doesn't have any real choice either.
Right, exactly. And of course, I mean, now we have the Affordable Care Act, but there's limited choices with that as well. I don't have I have coverage with my employer, so I don't really have any experience with the Affordable Care Act, but there's a lot of complaints about it. But so there's health insurance, there's the pharmaceutical companies. These are two situations, two industries that are really monopolized,
highly concentrated, right?
Highly concentrated, and
with
there are
just
few choices.
Major players,
right? And they are able to use different techniques of pricing that reduce transparency. And so, in a competitive market, one of the things that's supposed to be good about a competitive market is that prices are supposed to be transparent. Well, monopolists are able, often, not always, but often, they're often able to make things as difficult as they can to make price comparisons, and of course, that's what the health insurance companies do. But we've also had
They try to hide the true price of things,
right,
and they
right,
don't allow the price to get to the consumer prior to the treatment.
right. Hmm.
We have Kaiser coverage,
Hmm.
which we are have been actually pretty satisfied with over the years. But one truly irritating thing about that is, you'll go in to see your doctor, okay, and the doctor will prescribe something. The Kaiser doctor, a prescription, okay, or a test, or something for you to do, okay. And when you're on a tight budget, uh, okay, you ask the doctor, well, what's that going to cost? If there's a choice between doing this and doing that, okay, then what's that going to cost? None of the Kaiser doctors, I don't think any of the Kaiser doctors are permitted to talk about
Hmm.
the
Huh.
price of things.
Hmm.
They're busy prescribing this, okay, prescribing that. I don't even know, if they know any of the prices. Oh, you need a CT scan. What's the copay going to be on a CT scan? Okay, they
Hmm.
don't know what the copay, okay, is going to be on a
Yeah.
CT scan. They didn't know what the copay was going to be on a certain kind of X-ray this week,
Hmm.
even. But they could say to us, "Well, it's I'd be surprised if there was any copay, okay, at all." Okay, and that seems to be the way it turned out to be. But
Hmm.
they didn't know that. They were not in a position to inform us as consumers before we had to go and make a decision whether we wanted to do
Yeah.
that test or not. So
Yeah.
the transparency just doesn't exist, okay, in this particular system. Okay, and Lana Dell calls attention to Dean Baker, who did a wonderful presentation on patents at the Economists for Peace and Security event that we both attended a few years ago. I remembered that, but also Dean Baker has written a book on patents, okay, known, okay,
Hmm.
as
Yep.
Right, okay, is the name of
Hmm.
the book. And you can download that book for free. Now, there are copies of it that carry charges of various kinds also, if you get it from Amazon or you get it from some other source. But there is a link to download this book for free. And I've left the link in the comments for people to use. It's really a very good book, and the
Hmm.
focus is on the monopoly aspects, okay, of
Hmm.
what's going on in the industries where you can patent things.
Hmm.
And Dean also talks about alternative ways that we could deal with these industries so that they
Uh-huh.
would not be getting patents, and that you could set up,
Hmm.
okay, an economic system where they would still have plenty of incentive to do the development, but it would be clear from the beginning that the secrets were owned by the public.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and this is
Yeah. That's great.
hugely significant, okay, right at this point, because we haven't been able to farm out the manufacturing of vaccines to other countries because the owners of the secrets, the private companies who we gave patents to, are standing in the way because it would cut back on their profits. And so we haven't been able to enable other countries, to empower them to manufacture the vaccines that they need to be able to use to control the coronavirus in their populations. And that is one of the major reasons why we have the mutations we have, why we're always getting new
Yeah.
mutations, because we don't have the vaccines out there. They're only
Right.
out there in a few countries that are uh, highly favored by our westernized orientation that we have in this country. Okay, but in most countries, the percentage of vaccinated people is very, very, very low. That is resulting in mutations.
Mm-hmm.
And the waves and waves, that's one of the huge costs we're paying for having the patent system.
Yeah,
That cost is a
definitely.
million deaths in the United States right now.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the trade issues, a lot, we, our politicians push for these trade agreements. A lot of what those trade agreements are about is about protecting patents and copyrights.
Yes,
Big,
absolutely.
big time. And so we spend a lot of resources in these trade negotiations. And what it really is it's about trying to protect companies' profits.
Yes, in fact, just a few years ago, there was one trade agreement, okay, that was under consideration. It was called the TISA agreement,
Hmm.
Trade and Services Agreement. Okay. And
Hmm.
that agreement, which the Obama administration tried to push through
Hmm.
unsuccessfully, thank God, was all about protecting these trade secrets and
Hmm.
managing the market so these secrets
Hmm.
could not spread to other countries, so that the financial interests of these large companies, including the film companies, entertainment companies, IT
Hmm.
companies, could all be protected. So instead of protecting American consumers, they were going to protect these companies. That's what all of these trade agreements have been about, at least in part.
Yep.
Still
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah. So anyway, clearly monopolization is a big problem, is a big part of our problem with the healthcare system. And so I think that this is something that I think as activists work to to push for this. Uh, of course, one of the things that's standing in our way is the lobbying, because these companies have these such gigantic stakes at risk, and they don't want to let them go very easily.
Of course,
um,
and we would expect that.
yeah.
So
So
it's our job to act against it, because they're
right,
not going to decide to let go of these things by themselves.
right,
They're
yeah.
not going
So
to
I
decide
think
to act for the public purpose. We
oh,
have to
absolutely.
decide to act for the public purpose.
Right, right. So I think this is something that activists need to be aware of. One thing is that there is now a group called the Neo Brandeisians. They
Oh,
are mostly lawyers, a few economists, not many, but a few, and they are basically saying, let's go back to the old ways of thinking about antitrust. Let's take it back
question.
to. I'm sorry.
Who were some of the economists who
Marshall.
are working?
Okay. Marshall Steinbaum is one,
Ah, yes.
and Mark Glick. Mark Glick is another one.
Okay.
Let's
I
see.
don't recognize Glick's name, but in Marshall Steinbaum's case, he was one of the co-authors of the student debt elimination study
Uh-huh.
that
Hmm.
that Levy published. That Stephanie Kelton is, I
Hmm.
believe,
Oh,
the senior author of. Okay, but
okay.
Marshall was one of the co-authors, okay, of
Uh-huh.
that.
Well, he is now at the University of Utah, where Dean Baker is, and that's also where Mark Glick is located. And Mark Glick
Um, uh,
actually.
uh, uh, just a question with respect to Dean Baker. He's one of the founders and one of the two main figures at the Center for Economic and Policy Research here in Washington.
Mhm.
So, how is it that he's also at the University of Utah?
I'm not sure exactly, but he's part of the faculty.
He's part
It
of
may
the
be,
faculty at University of
yeah,
Utah. That's very
yeah,
interesting information.
yeah. So, so I mean, it's a very recent thing, just in the last year or so. So anyway, Mark Glick has, I don't know if you've probably heard of this George Soros group, the Institute for New Economic Thinking.
Oh yes, I
Um,
am very familiar with
yeah,
the
Mark Glick.
Soros Group. No, I know that George founded it by
Hmm.
giving a $50 million contribution
Hmm.
to start it. The
Hmm.
Open Societies Foundation, I believe,
Hmm.
gave them a $50 million a founding grant.
Hmm.
Okay, and the head of the foundation is a close friend of George's over the years. I've been watching them very closely. They've been very friendly to the development, okay, of MMT, and have
Hmm.
given grants to some of the MMTers, okay, as well.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Bill Mitchell, I saw, did a video and with them,
Uh,
and yeah.
was he being interviewed in that video? Who was
Hmm.
the interviewer? Okay, what was it?
I
Uh,
think it was that Marshall. I think
uh,
it may have been.
yeah, Marshall Auerbach.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's an
I think it was him.
MMTer himself. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, in the Fiscal Sustainability Conference of 2000, okay, in 10, which was held as a counter to the Fiscal Summit, okay, of the Peterson
Mm-hmm.
Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
one of the MMTers who was actually making a presentation there, the presentation on inflation, actually, okay, the economist who did that, okay, was Marshall Auerbach.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And the person who gave the opening speech at that conference was Bill Mitchell. He and
Mm-hmm.
Marshall, okay, are friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, Mark Glick has been one of the scholars at the INET, and he has a couple of papers on the INET website. One of them, a couple of them are pretty intense, but there was one that was pretty, I think, consumer friendly. And I can't remember exactly what the name of it is, but it does a good job. And I can give you the link later on, that you
Great.
can put it on. Yeah. But it does a good job of kind of explaining why, just kind of an intellectual explanation using, basic economics, why this argument of consumer surplus is just such a bad argument for antitrust. And so I've been kind of following his stuff, but there aren't many ag economists that are into this. Well, I'm kind of lone wolf here.
Um, so I have a question for you, which may not seem to be relevant, okay, to this, but I'm personally curious about it. But you have a PhD, okay, from Iowa State,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Historically, that university is very strong in statistics, but
Hmm.
specifically, did you have a very good background in statistics?
I okay, I mean, I had statistics and stuff. So you know, but I'm aware that they do have a very strong statistics program. A couple of the people, I think Fuller was gone by the time I got there. Um, but Vince Sposito, who was big in linear programming, he was there. And so so it had a pretty strong emphasis. I'm not a super quantitative person. So,
So you are more of an institutional economist.
yeah, yeah, I am. So, so yeah. Although they didn't really have an institutional, I guess I've kind of evolved into an institutional economist. So,
Well, you know, Jamie Galbraith is a pretty good institutional economist
yeah,
also, who has
right, yeah,
evolved, I think, you know, towards being an MMT economist over a period of time.
hmm
But he
yeah,
doesn't call himself that. He resists that label very
hmm
strongly. But his father, of course, was one of the leading institutional
yeah.
economists. Uh, hmm. Okay, so
So,
we seem to be getting a little near the end, so I would like to give you a chance to sum up, okay, and to make
okay,
some final points. I think that would be a good
okay,
thing
okay,
to do now. And then, if you're willing to stay, we will go on to consider the various comments that people have made.
okay, all right. So, yeah, basically, so what we have is we've had this transition away from strong antitrust policy that was very protective, or at least much more protective of competition, towards a a policy that is antitrust in name, but not at all in spirit. And it has really led to a lot of you know it has really contributed to a lot of the inequality problems that we have nowadays.
Yes, I
And
agree.
it's done, yeah, and it's done so in, sort of in big ways and in small ways. And I do think that antitrust is something that healthcare activists, certainly at least should have some idea about. And especially, I mean, a lot of antitrust activity actually goes on at the state level, and because states, you know, some states are strong about pushing it, some states are not. Sometimes a particular state that might be more strong about it, like New York has been strong at times, but and Iowa has been strong at times, but that I think is something that might be worth keeping an eye out on. Eye out on for the healthcare activists, because there might be some ways that, if you can pay attention to some of the cases that are those could be good arguments that you can use to try to make a case for Medicare for all.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yeah. So, and it's just a really important issue, because really, I mean, it's not just that our healthcare system is so messed up. It's that one of the ways that it's so messed up is that there's so much monopoly power in it. And it seems like the monopoly power seems to even be increasing, because you have more and more private equity companies buying up hospitals, buying up practices.
Yes,
And
yes,
medical practices, they can't survive on their own anymore. I mean, you can't have a doctor who just, has a shop like an office like you think of maybe a country doctor. You just can't do that, because they gotta be bringing in enough revenue that they can have at least one, if not a team of people who just deal with insurance companies. I mean,
yes,
that's their
yes,
job.
yes, yes, yes.
And yeah. And
And that's
so, and
a strong argument actually for Medicare for all, because that would cut out all the
mhm,
insurance companies and take that burden
yeah,
off the doctors.
yeah,
So you might be able to begin to see small practices again.
right, yeah, might be. And so, the monopoly problem is a problem on many levels that you don't necessarily even think of. And one of the real terrible things about Bork's argument was it only made it about price, but there's so much more about price. And
Yes.
and it's not even just for the consumer themselves. It also makes these companies bigger, and so they have more market power against their employees. And so they have more ability to, suppress wages. They have more ability to reduce benefits. And another thing that I kind of find really, really kind of heartbreaking when you think of with respect to healthcare is I know that my husband and I were in a period where we didn't have health insurance. We had to, buy it on the market. And this was before Affordable Care. And, it occurred to me during that time that, as an economist, healthcare is really a way of holding power over the workers, really strong way of holding power over the workers. And not just power over the workers, power over small businesses too, because small businesses, really can't afford to compete for workers with the healthcare situation, with the insurance system that we have, because the insurance companies, basically they charge them a really high rate. And it's legitimate in that, when you have a smaller group, the cost, you don't have the big amount of customers to spread the costs out over. So from a actuarial point of view, they have a valid argument. But the problem is that it makes yet another thing that makes it hard for small businesses to form. And many people, I think there's many people who probably would have loved to quit their jobs and start a new business.
Oh,
but
yes.
They might have a kid, they might have a kid with really bad allergies, or a spouse who's had a medical condition, and they just can't afford to separate from that job. So I also really wonder, from an economics perspective, how much innovation is being suppressed, not just from monopoly, but also from our healthcare system.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So
okay.
Anyway.
So I have a question. I think it's an important one. From your point of view, from your studies, are the antitrust laws we have now, are they adequate? Is the problem one of not enforcing the antitrust laws we have now, or is the problem one of needing to pass some new antitrust laws, or are both things problems
I think
addressed to fix the system?
Yeah. I think it's both things. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so this isn't my area. But I'll tell you what, one person that is a lawyer is Zephyr Teachout, and she wrote a book on monopolies, and recently. And there's actually several books out right now. Barry Lynn is someone who's been, he's the head of Open Markets Institute, I think it is. And he has 3 books.
The institute that Max Stoller is at, isn't it?
He used to be at. He used to be at it, but now he's at the American Economic Liberties
the project.
Project. So
the project. Yeah. However, is the project inside an institute?
No, I don't believe so.
It's completely independent in itself as a corporation.
I believe so. I haven't ever seen anything that indicates that it's kind of a part of something else. But I'll give you the links to those as well. And there's a lot of good information about background on monopoly and antitrust.
Okay.
So, and especially right now, the tech companies, they're a particular problem. So, Sherman Act is from 1890, and we've had other acts since then, but certainly I think we need Congress to revisit some of this stuff. But we also need, we need some changes in the way it is enforced. And that is there is a problem, though, because we've had, 50 years now of neoliberal thinking, and neoliberal
50
thinking.
years of simply letting the corporations go and not enforcing the antitrust laws we have.
Yeah. I mean, I've had arguments.
Do we really know whether we need any new laws, or maybe we just need people to enforce the laws we have now?
Well, I think probably we ought to at least start with enforcing.
Start with enforcing, but really tough enforcement.
Right. Tough enforcement. That's what we need. And
really expose them to the laws.
Right. And I think we need to start by spreading awareness of this, because people just don't, it's really not something to think about. I think a lot of people know. I mean, a lot of people do kind of see that, things seem to get smaller and things don't last as long as they used to. There's all this, crapification.
Crapification. Good.
And so
there's a lot of crapification.
So, and I mean, these are the kinds of things that make it more and more expensive to live for the average person. I mean, there's some of the things, but because it's hard to even find good quality things a lot of times. But so I think what we need is first to start really educating people. We have the MMT activists and stuff. I don't know that if there'd ever be antitrust activists, but I think if people, are activists on other issues, they can become aware of how important this issue is with respect to their own particular issue. And it is really, really important, and especially when it comes to healthcare.
Okay. So great. I think this conversation was a great one. Very informative. Thank you very much, Sherry.
You're welcome.
Let us turn to the comments now.
Okay.
We have one from Laura Fielding who says, I have my knitting needles in hand. This is going to be great. Learning with and from FOAF folks is a pleasure. We are the FOAF folks, the fighting on all front folks. And Steve Wilbrand says, that name sounds familiar. I think the name Sherry Wise is what he means. And Amber says, what she's doing here is she is citing your antitrust series, Part 1, The Landlord Game, written by Sherry Wise, economist, the first of a series on antitrust, something which has had a significant effect on your life, though you may not know it or why. And that's published at Beyond the Spectrum, and the link is in the comments. And the second installment of the amazing antitrust series, as Amber characterizes it, and she says, please take a second to like and share. And this talks about the patents, and the monopoly over patents creates a lot of problems. It allows the patentee to charge the maximum to consumers, the maximum the traffic will bear, for as long as the patent actually lasts. This may not be problem if the patented product is a luxury item, like parts that go into a smartphone, but can violate basic human rights if it involves such things as life-saving drugs. And that's a quote from Ha Jun Chang, which is a very famous economist. He's not an MMT economist, but he's considered one of the top economists in the world. I encountered his work. I have written this book on trade. Who needs balanced trade? Who needs a
Bad
balanced budget?
Samaritans. And he wrote that book, Bad Samaritans.
Yes, he did.
Mhm.
And in some of that book, I discuss his work, which is very logically laid out. I had a few bones to pick with it, but clearly a great economist.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Part 3 of the Antitrust series by economist Sherry Wise. This section addresses how antitrust regulation evolved within both the executive and judicial branches of the federal government, becoming a very effective force in promoting a market system that operated with a high degree of freedom, yet was able to control many of the negative aspects of capitalism. Part 2 showed what is meant by uncompetitive from an economic perspective, why it is problematic, and what kinds of B, and the statement ends there. I don't know how she finished that. Okay, I did want to remark here, though, very briefly, that the development of antitrust law during the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s can be looked at, as the development of the Brandeisian dream for the economy, of the United States. It was basically the vision of Brandeis made real.
Yeah.
Okay, and that had a lot to do with the New Deal, and a lot to do with the things, that Roosevelt actually made possible over a period of time. And what happened afterwards can be looked at as an attempt to overthrow the kind of society that Brandeis conceived and that actually delivered so much prosperity to us during the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. And they did succeed in overturning, the Brandeisian society, which was also a liberal democracy. And they did succeed in creating the faux democracy that we have now. And I think that's very important to recognize. I said, thank you, Amber, because she was posting the links that we asked her to post. Ellis Winningham has made a comment. He asked whether Chamberlain's first name, was Edward.
Ah, that's it. Yes,
Edward
that is right. Yeah.
Right. So
Edward,
Ellis
yeah,
knew
yeah.
who the
Thank you, Edward Ellis.
yes, if you're still here listening to this. And Carmen Yunus says, hiya, friends. Hiya, Carmen. And Iha Ko says, hey, everyone. And I welcomed him. And Deborah Wilson says, good info. Thank you, Deborah. Jeffrey Denton says, they have something these days called an interlocking directorate that sidesteps a lot of antitrust laws. I wouldn't exactly say that it was these days. I think that the technique of interlocking directorates actually dates back certainly to the early 20th century and maybe to the 19th century. The corporate types had already discovered that they could fool around with interlocking directorates.
Yeah, so that's actually related. The interlocking directorate is actually kind of related to what they called trust back then. So yeah, it's kind of all part of it. And I think it was Rockefeller who, whose people came up with this thing. And so, yeah. And so yeah, these monopolized companies, interlocking directorates is it's amazing. When you start looking at some of these companies, and you see who's on the boards, and these companies as they get bought out, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I think this is one of the things that Roosevelt's about trust busters,
Mhm.
specifically the brain trust, okay, that
Right.
Roosevelt had, which was comprised of Rexford, Tugwell, okay,
Hmm.
A. Burley, and I've forgotten who the third member, okay, the brain trust was. But at that time, in the 1930s, early 1930s, they were very concerned with the interlocking directorates that were common
Hmm.
in corporations at that
Hmm.
time, and they tried to do something about it in terms of antitrust laws that were passed, okay, at that time,
Yeah.
and in the enforcement, okay, of antitrust laws. And they were somewhat successful for some time, but of course, everything ran amok in the
Mhm.
1970s, okay, and
Yeah.
1980s.
Yeah.
Uh,
Let me just say this one thing. This is not really specifically about antitrust, but there are, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Joe. There are so many problems with corporate governance these days. So
oh,
many. Starting, but at the very beginning, is the idea of the concept of that the purpose of the corporation is to maximize shareholder value, and that's another brain, a gift to us from Milton Friedman. But that's only start of it. There's so many problems with corporate governance today, and people just really aren't aware that corporations are supposed to, I mean, initially they were supposed to be something to benefit the public.
absolutely. The original corporate laws actually made it explicit that corporations that were created by states were created to perform a public purpose, and the corporations were supposed to state the public purpose in their incorporation papers. And theoretically, the states were supposed to evaluate the corporations that were being created in terms of whether the purposes they stated were actually the public purposes. Now, our states have not been performing that particular function. They routinely grant a corporate charter. They don't take seriously the statement of a public purpose, and they certainly don't take seriously the enforcement of any public purpose that a corporation might state in its incorporation papers. We all know this is true. And we
Yeah.
have here in America, we have wholesale ignoring of the legal structure, okay, of the laws, okay, and of the supposed purposes that are supposed to be in back of things. And we've done that for so long now, it's become ingrained in our culture.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
just, we accept a pervasive dishonesty in business manners as okay because it's all in the pursuit, okay, of profit.
Right.
And, and
Exactly.
we realize things are not supposed to be that way. They were never originally created that way. So I
Yeah.
think Mary is entirely right that the idea that corporations are created to maximize stakeholder value is wrong. It's a false idea.
Hmm.
Sure, that's what the shareholders would like. Well, whoopee for them, but that's not why the corporation was originally created.
Yeah.
So there we go. So Steve Wolfbrand says, yes, vertically integrated means they own all forms of production, including transportation.
Hmm. Yep.
Evelina Potts says, fooey. And I asked, Fooey? And Evelina Pont repeated, Fooey. So I think that's about what we were talking about at that time, which was what the corporates were doing. Kay says, hi, Evelina Pont. Carmen says, is this leading up to something called the Powell Memo or the Powell document? Yeah, the Powell Memo was a master plan. It was written something like 1972, 1971, 1973. I forget exactly. But Lewis Powell was then a corporate lawyer. And he was asked by one of the corporate associations to write a memo on how the influence of business could be maximized in the United States, because the corporate types were in a panic that the whole government had been taken over by progressives that was extremely anti-business, and anti-corporate, and that the profits of the corporations were going to be completely choked off. So they engaged Lewis Powell to write a memorandum to outline how the government and our society could be taken back actually from the liberals, because they weren't really viewed as the progressives at that time. They were viewed as the liberals. Now, that term was not used in the same way we use it now. It's now kind of an expression of contempt, as in the shit libs expression. But at that time, one of the more forward-looking groups in society were the liberals. The more forward-looking senators, who were all but socialists, were liberals. And they were shackling corporations and regulating them very, very tightly. And Lewis Powell was writing a master plan for the corporations to take back control. This plan turned out to be very important to neoliberalism, and to the development of the ideology. And then Lewis Powell was appointed to the Supreme Court by Richard Nixon. I forget, in 1972 or 1973. It was just before Nixon left. And then he started influencing things inside of the Supreme Court. And he was the guy who originated the doctrines that corporations were to have the same rights as individuals. And he wrote that into the law as a Supreme Court justice. So he was very, very influential person. I believe he sat on the Supreme Court from 1972 to 1987. When he died, he was enormously influential in reshaping our law and reshaping our politics, because his master plan is still in use today. So Jeffrey Denton says, yes, 5 or 6 corporations own just about everything a human being needs to live. 5 or 6 fossil fuel monopolies, 5 or 6 of the medium monopolies, etc., etc. All owned by globalists with the same exact agenda, which is not ours. Those are comments from Jeffrey Denton. Evelina says we can talk about Amazon, and we certainly can, Evelina. We can certainly talk about Amazon. Evelina
Joe,
says,
can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Joe, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
I can't hear you for some reason.
That's interesting. I don't know why you can't hear me, but I can hear you. It's okay. I can hear you, if you want to speak. I'm not sure what's happened, to your sound. I think my sound's okay. but people will tell me if it's not. So let me scroll to the bottom and see if there's a problem with my sound. See if I got any comments.
I can't even get your sound clear.
Well, what you have to do on your system is to refresh your page. That's what you need to do. I'm talking to Bonnie now, of course. And I don't see any late comments saying there's something wrong with my sound. As far as I know, my sound is fine. Lana says that she can hear both of us. And also Catherine also says no problem here. I can hear both of you. So we both can be heard. So I think there's a problem at your end concerning whether you can hear me. But I'm going to go on with the comments. Okay, and if Sherry wants to say something, she can be heard. So her comments can get out there, certainly. So if she wants to make any comments, I will quickly shut up and allow her to make those comments. So Carmen says, thanks, Joe. You're just a walking computer, but not Gates nor any of them own you. Thank you, Carmen. I am too poor to be owned. And Jeff Denton says, if every single American got a $600 million contract with the CIA to spy on Americans, then we would be a capitalist country. But all of the competition has been bought up, unfortunately. Yes, Jeff, you're quite right about that. Lana says, hi. Hi, Lana. And Laura says, shared to Red Berets, Medicare for All, Jeffrey Denton. I think you normally share to the RB's group, right? But you or Dolores Pierce. Thank you both very much. Thank you for coming, Laura Fielding, if you're still here. Carmen says, howdy, Lana. Evelina says, Jeffrey Denton, bitter. Ha ha. Ha ha. What's ha ha about that, Evelina? Jeffrey Denton says, yeah, I put in about 8 places, but Dolores does usually take care, of Red Berets when it comes to Joe, and a lot of other pretty good podcasts. Laura says, I really appreciate this. I know I've all but abandoned Facebook because I'm on Twitter so much, so I can try to do better, but I feel grateful to you both for sharing Joseph M. Firestone shows to our group for so long. Evelina says, can we? It was a question. And Lana says, hi, Carmen. And Lana says, did either of the Dulles brothers help lay the groundwork for any of these changes? I am just discovering. Oh, Sherry has come back in again. So I'm move her from there, and I'm going to add her to here. Hello, Sherry?
Hello. I don't know what happened. I lost the sound on my tablet.
You lost the sound from my end, but we could hear you all through this time. Everybody could have heard you.
So what I did was I got on my phone. I got just now. I just signed off on the tablet and I got on my phone, and now I can hear you. So I guess the problem is the tablet. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm not sure what happened. Okay, but anyway, we've gone on, and we're now down to the comments at roughly 9:48. And Lana asks, did either of the Dulles brothers help lay the groundwork for any of these changes? I'm just discovering these two evil bastards. That's John Foster Dulles, okay, and his brother Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA in the formative period of the CIA. They had a lot to do with changes that created the military-industrial complex. Certainly, and John Foster Dulles, of course, had a lot to do with the rabidly anti-communist and anti-socialist the foreign policy, okay, of the United States during this time. But I don't think the Dulles brothers had much to do with the emergence of the civilian economic structures and the concentration of power there. And I don't
Yeah.
think they had much to do with the development of neoliberal forms, okay, of ideology. I think those were separate movements.
Yeah.
Okay, now I think later they interlocked with the heritage, okay, of the Dulles brothers, but I think that they were both gone from power by the time, okay, that neoliberalism really began to take over in the
Yeah.
United States. But there were a lot of precedents they set that were useful in the area of neoliberal foreign policy, for sure. Jeff Denton says, during the Bush Jr. administration, my favorite Seattle DJs had to sit out their contracts for a year and a half because all the stations were bought up by the same owners after the Bush administration had relaxed the antitrust laws. Yeah, I think that was probably the Sterling network of stations. They kept on buying out these radio and TV stations across the United States because concentration was now legal because Bush had relaxed, okay, the antitrust laws. So yes, this was happening, and we have the legacy, okay, of that now, where the Sterling Network and Fox News basically controls the right wing attitudes that uh, inhabit the minds of many, many Americans across the United States. Uh, Evelyn Napon says, the young people use Amazon overwhelmingly, yet I doubt they realize the implications for their future. I know they don't realize the implications for their future. And it's hard for any single person to do anything about that. I mean, you can't get people to organize en masse in such a way that it would affect Amazon. In order to do it, you would have to organize a general strike with the objective being to disempower Amazon.
Yeah.
You'd have to do that. And that's perhaps something we should be doing, but it's going to take a lot of doing, believe me.
Yeah, Amazon is something that really has just really gotten to me over the years. I mean, for one thing, Joe, you probably remember in the early days of Amazon, they got away with not charging state taxes.
Yes,
Remember?
the sales
And
tax.
yeah,
Yeah, they
and
didn't
so
have to charge any sales tax.
yeah,
Amazing.
and so they were undercutting all these bookstores. So what they were doing is engaging in, I mean, that's what's the word for it again? But it's predatory pricing, and that's illegal. Under our antitrust statutes.
And those laws were never enforced.
Yeah, and
They never enforced them. If they had enforced the laws, there would be no Amazon today.
yeah, and exactly, and both Facebook and Amazon, and probably Google too, but I'm not as familiar. They bought out competitors, and that's not supposed to happen. I mean, they bought out companies that were even potential. I mean, potential competitors. And again, that's all failure to enforce antitrust.
Yeah. And that deeply affects our cultural lives. Deeply affects our cultural lives. And creates an increasing poverty in our cultural
Yep.
lives also. Carmen says, pardon me, Lana, I'm deep into what's being said, not trying to ignore you or anything. Glad you made it. It just ain't the same without you. Evelina says, you don't have choice. Yes, that's right. Carmen says, so when you buy generic cereal, are those still the property, okay, of big cereal? I suppose that's has to be decided, okay, on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Probably the big companies are putting out cereals that are generic cereals. There are probably small companies that are doing that as well. It may be that in that area that there are things that small companies can do, because if people are looking for generics, then the big companies don't have the advantage, okay, of branding.
What you could do is you could even, ask the company who sources these, who's producing these products for you.
Yes.
May not always be easy to find out, but sometimes maybe you might be able to find out. Because I've had, even sometimes just like cashiers and stuff, who've known who actually is making some of their food. So can't always find out, but you can look into it.
Yes, you can, and a lot of times I think you can find out, and I think you're right. Sometimes cashiers in various places say, "Oh, this is," and even think that's an advantage. That if they tell you that this so-called cereal is really made by General Mills, that oh, you should trust it because it's made by General Mills. Sometimes they're telling you that because that's what they think. Kay says, always have to look at package sizes anymore. Yes, keep a close watch on that. And Jeff says, I bought my grandson a big wheel for his birthday in July. You cannot just go into Walmart or Fred Meyer. I don't even know what Fred Meyer is, Jeff, and buy a big wheel anymore. Maybe a smaller one, but not the original. I had to get it, okay, at Amazon. And he frowns. And Lana says, oh no, Carmen, rough couple of days here. That's why I am late. No problem. Probably a rough couple of days, sort of in the middle of your settlement, right? Or you're actually preparing to go into the house. So Lana says, so similar to the mergers of the news organizations that are now under 5 or 6 umbrellas. So similar indeed. And Kay is wishing a happy anniversary, Joe and Bonnie. Thank you, Kay. And Evelyn says, I've noticed organics are expensive. Hope prices become more competitive soon. Yes, organics are more expensive, but they are worth it. They are worth it. They're real important if you're on an anti-cancer diet. Dolores Pierce says, happy anniversary, and thank you, Dolores.
Thank you.
Carmen says, it's in a few days. It's not yet quite there. Carmen Arena says, you'll have to settle for ham hocks, Joe. Sorry, don't want any ham hocks. Lana says, it seems to me a bit odd that the group who touts the free market are all about concentration of power with actual monopolies.
Yep.
Yes, it is more than a bit odd, but of course that hypocrisy has been there from the beginning. What is a free market to them? It's a market where the government is not actually regulating, but allowing all manner of concentration to take place. Obviously, that is not a free market. Jeff Denton says nobody claims to support healthcare reform, ever talks about the Kaiser Corporation or the 1973 HMO Act. Kind of a litmus test for me. Well, I kind of remember that under Nixon that happened. That was part, okay, of Nixon's program. I'm not sure quite what he intended there. Maybe he was taking advice from Lewis Powell. And Lana says, I hate prepackaged hamburger. Thus, I go to Whole Foods. And you think that Whole Foods doesn't have any prepackaged hamburger? I wonder to what degree Whole Foods has changed since it was bought by Amazon, by Bezos. And Liesel Girl says, vertical integration is the major cause of the inequality and low wages while producing low quality product. Carmen says, sorry for your rough days, Lana. Ooh, how much rougher does it get? Sigh. And Jeffrey Denton says, Hillary and Chelsea Clinton have both been on the board of Walmart. Yeah, I know. Carmen Munoz says, only thing I buy in the Wally world are 39 cents a pound for bananas. Bananas at 39 cents a pound. I don't know how much a banana weighs, but I know that our organic bananas are 25 cents a banana at Trader Joe's. So I don't know how that compares to 39 cents a pound. How many bananas in a pound, honey?
I have no idea.
I think it'll vary a lot.
It'll vary a lot. Depends on the size of the banana, right?
Different sizes.
Yeah, they're different sizes. And Lana says, thanks, Carmen. My day to be in the barrel. I never ask how bad because I don't like the answer. Laugh out loud.
Tell
Jeff.
Sherry that I really have enjoyed her being on.
So Bonnie says, if you didn't hear that, she really enjoys your being on tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
She really has gotten a lot out of it.
Welcome.
Okay, I appreciate that. Good. I'm glad.
Okay, so thank you, Sherry. And Jeffrey says about preventing diabetes, just hoping that people get it so they can sell them insulin for at least 300% more than it costs to make. Yes, that is what happens. Carmen says, well, yeah, because politicians are D'CKX. And the reference is to Viagra. And then I left a link to Dean Baker's book, his rig book. And Jeffrey Denton says, health and maintenance organizations was designated as service organizations up until December 29th, 1973, when they became for-profit entities with the signing of the HMO Act. But nobody talks about it. Obviously, it's absolutely critical because the nature of Kaiser was really changed back then when it became a for-profit company. Okay, just a comment on, God bless you, honey.
Thank you.
Okay, with respect to Dean Baker, he has been growing closer over the years, okay, to Stephanie Kelton. And a lot of his statements of late concerning concerning the deficit and concerning the creation, okay, of money are very close to MMT perspectives on that particular subject. And I think this actually goes both ways, that quite a few of the MMTers have been paying attention to Dean's work, especially his work, okay, in the patent area and monopoly area. But Dean has also done some work with Jared Bernstein in the job guarantee area. They wrote a book together on the job guarantee. So Kay says, Viagra doesn't fix your brain. Shake my head. I'd rather have a smart man than one with a hard dick. Thank you, Kay. Thank you, Kay. Carmina says, gotcha, Lana. Jeff Denton says, more than a decade after the Affordable Care Act and medical bills are still a leading cause of bankruptcy, with nearly 80% of Americans who are forced to file actually having health insurance at the time. That is very true, Jeff. The Affordable Care Act is just a big failure, okay, in my view. And if I were Obama, I would be increasingly less likely to claim credit for it.
Yeah.
Kay says, we need single payer now. We needed it yesterday. Lana, hi to Sherry, by the way, since we know each other. Does she know that the VA, that Virginia is listed among the states with health coverage proposals on onepayerstates.org?
Oh, no. I'll look that up.
Yes, and I'm going to be getting more deeply into that as well. As you know, Georgia Davenport will be coming on here on Tuesday, and one of the things we'll be talking about is onepayerstates.org and what is going on there, because I understand Georgia has been deeply involved in that.
Hmm.
Lana says, Dean Baker, wonderful presentation on patents of the economist's peace and security event I attended with Dr. Joe a few years ago. Lisa Girl says, as if anyone can shop for healthcare. That's a ghoulish joke. It really is a ghoulish joke. Like if you go on the exchanges, you can't possibly rationally compare these different plans, okay, that are out there. You just don't know what you're getting. There's no way to know what you're getting. That was a ghoulish joke. It was just awful. And right from the get-go, it was awful. I mean, imagine people charging people taxes for 4 years before they can use the surface, and deliberately so, setting it up so that in order to fit in the 10-year window for pay-go, they would tax before they offered the service. For years, it was one of the most politically stupid things that any group of people has ever done, in my maybe not so humble estimation, but whatever. Evelina says, so doctors are in the dark too, and they aren't given enough time to spend with patients, appointments 10 to 15 minutes apart. Yeah, I noticed that, but I also noticed that it seems different, okay, at Kaiser here. When we go to see our GP,
It takes your time.
yeah, we just, we talk, we can ask all kinds of questions, express all kinds of concerns. It doesn't seem to matter how long it takes. So Kaiser seems to be giving the gateway doctors whatever time they need to deal with their patients. We found that, and we've really appreciated it, okay, about the Kaiser. And we've always felt that we've had very good gateway doctors at Kaiser over the years. This is, I guess, actually since the 1980s. We had to give up Kaiser for a few years because during the period 1993 to what was it, 1995, I guess. We were, when did I turn 65 again? Let's see. Oh, no, it wasn't then. It was somewhere between 2001 and 2004. The charges for insurance had gone up so high that as a consultant with an income that was sometimes good and often but not so good, we couldn't afford the health insurance. It was costing $800 or $900 a month, between the two of us. So we had to gamble, and we gambled for 3 years, okay, and it worked out okay for us. But we were lucky; we didn't get any serious illnesses. But we were in the age range of 63 to 65, and believe me, we were frightened because things go wrong, okay, at that age. Once I broke a small bone in my foot. It certainly felt like that. And I hobbled around for a couple of weeks. Didn't dare go to the doctor for it. It got better, healed over time, so it was fine. But that was a very, very dangerous time. And we breathed a sigh of relief when we got to Medicare age and we were able to afford to go back to Kaiser again. And since then, we've gotten very good care from them. But anyway, Evelina says, like a frickin' assembly line. And also somebody remarked, yeah, it was Evelina also. So doctors are in the dark too, and they aren't given enough time to spend with patients' appointments 10 to 15 minutes apart. Well, as I said, we don't have that problem, okay, at Kaiser. It seems we don't have that problem. Evelina said, oh, and Solana says, totally agree, Lisa. Evelina says, sometimes with more than one patient simultaneously, it's BS. And Kay says, it's awful here. Evelina Pont, and Evelina says, patient because she had a typo earlier. Carmen says, we're going to need new vaccines anyway. Yeah, we are. They're going to have to develop vaccines probably specific to the variants. Lana says, where is Teddy Roosevelt when we need him? Hashtag trustbuster. Yes. I'm afraid the Roosevelts are long gone. And the Roosevelts that exist now are nothing like them. Just look at the Roosevelt who smeared Alex Morse, had a hand in smearing him, okay, in Massachusetts on behalf, okay, of Richie Neal. That is no. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt has to be turning over in his grave over that one. And Kay says, oh, bummer, sucks. Evelina says, it's the same in private health everywhere, and in the public sector, you're simply overwhelmed, but that's understandable in developing countries like Argentina. Certainly shouldn't be the case in the States. I suspect there are certain areas in which Argentina is more developed, okay, than the States, in spite of the vast amount of trouble it's had, okay, in recent years. Jeffrey Denton says you can surprisingly still find it on any search engine that he took $20 million from the healthcare industry and gave us the Romney for-profit healthcare plan. Yes, but it wasn't only Romney's for-profit healthcare plan that he gave us. The healthcare plan, if I recall correctly, came right out of the Heritage Foundation, a Republican think tank that over the years has been greatly supported by the Koch brothers. So, yes, this was a Koch brother generated healthcare plan in some sense. Kay says, exactly, Evelina. Kay Liesel Girl says, Lana, thank you. It's my trams triggers firing. Trams triggers? I'm not sure what trams triggers are. Kay says, yes, I know that, Jeffrey. And Jeffrey Denton says, George Soros and the late but David Rockefeller look like brothers, but one supposedly in two different parties and have many joint ventures. George Soros, of course, is a Hungarian Jew who was his family managed to survive the Holocaust, and after that, he left Hungary, okay, and he went to London, and he studied, okay, at London University, and there he came under the influence of Karl Popper, and part of his success, okay, in investing, he credits, okay, to the philosophy of Karl Popper, which he evidently has followed. When he takes a critical look, okay, at investments, he has always indicated that he's used the methods of thinking that were taught to him, okay, by Karl Popper. And, of course, he named his foundations later the Open Society Foundations, and that came right out of Karl Popper's books on the Open Society. 2 volumes, okay, on the Open Society. So George Soros, okay, is a Popperian, and he's actually a very brilliant man, okay, a brilliant thinker. He wrote a very good book, okay, on terrorism that I had the pleasure of actually reviewing before, okay, it was published, and I made a number of suggestions, which he seems to have incorporated in the book. So. And Liesel Girl says, trauma And Lana says, Lisa trauma. Indeed, Evelina says, it's only one party, remember? Kay says, Romney's plan in Massachusetts was hated too, as the Affordable Care Act is now. It says, call it establishment, but neoliberal policy. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Lemon socialism to the end. Kay Clark says, all elites are on the same side, and it isn't our side. I don't know if all elites are on the same side. Like, for example, but Nick Hanauer comes to mind, okay, as someone who often seems to be on our side. Sometimes Tom Steyer seems to be okay on our side. So there are some exceptions to the rules. The millionaires, but the patriotic millionaires group is one that seems to be very concerned about people and taxation, and voluntarily advocates for higher taxes on themselves in the interests of society. So they recognize the danger to democracy from the taxation system we have now, and they're willing to pay higher taxes to get rid of that danger. So uh, it's not true that all elites are on the same side. Okay, I don't think. But perhaps in the majority of cases, certainly in the heavy majority of cases. Evelina says, irregardless of party, brilliant K. And Kay says, we have two local small hospitals here in Stark City, Ohio, and they refuse to open them up to treat emergency cases here, to treat people who are not virus cases, even though Ohio virus cases are going through the roof. Carmen says, too much rules and regulations for every little thing. Goddamn think tanks. Carmen says, I got to get that teach out book, by your book too, Joe. Which book, Carmen? I have 7 books, K on MMT, and an 8th book, which is about the subject of by riskonomics, which is not MMT, but it's kind of a philosophical approach to risk. Evelina says, definitely require creativity in the health system. Too many protocols to follow that don't serve a public purpose, serve the industry. Kay says, crapification, good word. And Lana says, crapification, I love it. I do too. Sherry is so down to earth on issues, but Evelina says, Carmen says, no more lamb shanks. That's just a bunch of crapification. And Evelina says it is. And Kay says, thank you, Sherry, for being here. Evelina says, Jeffrey Denton, see what I mean about Amazon, everything on there. The question is to have choice or not to have a choice. Amana says, was Brandeis also about education? Very much so. And that's why the university, Brandeis University, is named after Louis Brandeis. I once spent about a year, close to a year anyway, doing some research, at Brandeis, at the Center for the Study of Political Violence there. And Evelyn says to have a choice, not to have a choice. I guess I read that already. Cases, I haven't used Amazon since they were just a bookseller. Evelyn says, I refuse. Kay says, me too. Evelina. I wish I had the choice to do that, but there are certain things that we really can't afford at an affordable price, at a price we can afford, except to go to Amazon. And I think a lot of Americans are probably forced into that particular situation, or at least feel forced. Jeff Denton says, yes, it was. It was Rockefeller whose motto was, competition is a sin. I don't think Soros feels that way. I don't think he feels competition is a sin, but I may be mistaken about that. Ellis Whittingham says, good old Uncle Milty. Yeah, Uncle Milty Freeman. And Evelina, not that Uncle Milty. A different kind of Uncle Milty, yeah. Evelina says, yeah, unfair competition is a sin. And Carmen Muniz says, thank you for that in-depth explanation of the Powell memo. Fantastic. Well, I wouldn't say it was really fantastic, Carmen, but thank you. Lana says, I can hear both. And Catherine Lewandowski says, no problem here. I can hear both of you. Catherine Lewandowski is very well known in the Red Berets movement. I'm really so glad she's here. Carmen Mina says, I hear both of you, and that was Bonnie in the background. Yes, that was Bonnie in the background. I scrolled down too fast, so I missed a bunch of things, so I'm going back up.
Oh, can I say one more thing about Louis Brandeis?
Please, please. Say many things about Louis Brandeis that you want to.
He was also one of the early people involved with privacy rights. He was very, very much of a person who fought for privacy.
Yes, he was a civil libertarian in general. In fact, for years there were dissenters on the court. They lined up in case after case: Brandeis, Holmes, and Cardozo. Okay, they were a team of dissenters who wrote some of the most brilliant legal doctrines. Okay, but they were in a minority. But those legal doctrines were later picked up when Roosevelt gained control of the Supreme Court. So they were very influential, okay, and very important. But Brandeis was known to FDR for a very long time because they mixed during the Wilson administration.
Right.
Okay, and they got to know each other there, and they became friends. And
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, I remembered who the other Supreme Court justice was that was very supportive of, that was really a follower of Brandeis, and that was William Douglas.
William O. Douglas, who is about the most lefty Supreme Court justice ever to sit on the bench, and a total firebrand. And I got to say, William O. Douglas was my favorite Supreme Court justice of all time, perhaps. However, Holmes and Brandeis were great, too. They were really great. And Cardozo was pretty good. Harlan Fix Stone was excellent as well. There were a lot of people during that period of time who were really excellent justices. And Lana says, there was no crapification of justices until much later. Now we have the Federalist Society crapification of the justices of the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
really. All 6 of those justices are members of the Federalist Society, like robots. Lana says, please remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button. Like, share, and subscribe. Please. And don't forget my Patreon, which is up there, patreon.com, Joe_Firestone, of course, so I can keep the lights on here. And Carmen says, your tablet is probably updating. It always creates chaos when an automatic update comes in. Carmina says, what about Alibaba? Okay, is that a monopoly? I don't know whether it's a monopoly in China. It's certainly a very, very, very huge company. I don't know whether the Chinese allow it to be a monopoly, but they very well might. They might have substantial state interests, okay, in Alibaba. So, Jeffrey Denton says, Fred Meyer was bought up by Kroger. Anyway, I see. It's a local Seattle chain or a Washington State chain that was bought up by Kroger. Lana says, I agree, organic is worth it. And Jeffrey says, if we weren't controlled by corporations, inorganic food would be called inorganic food, and organic food would just be called food. Very good, Jeffrey. I like that. Amber says, this has been so awesome. I'm going to listen again tomorrow. So good. Thank you, Miss Sherry. Miss
Thank
Sherry.
you, Amber.
Miss Sherry. Yes, thank you, Amber. And Lana says, HMO, puke. Jeff says, if you look at the charts, the cost of healthcare started skyrocketing right in 1973 after Nixon signed the HMO Act. Doesn't surprise me at all. And but by the way, that's when Canada was locking up its single payer program in all the states at just about that same time. So Canada was moving to single payer. Johnson failed in getting single payer here. He tried, but he couldn't get past the Medicare Act, okay, and Medicaid, of course. Okay, and it wasn't possible for Nixon and Teddy Kennedy to come to a compromise. That's what killed the possibilities for Medicare for all back then. And that's what led to Nixon signing the HMO Act. Evelina says, I don't mind paying more for organics, but families on a low income can't afford them. Absolutely true, Evelina. They deserve to be on an anti-cancer diet too. I entirely agree, Evelina. I entirely agree. Okay, Ellis Winningham says, happy upcoming anniversary, Joe and Bonnie. We should revisit the idea of writing that paper about calculating the Nehru on Venus.
Yep, definitely.
What a wonderful idea, Alice. Lana says, Whole Foods 99% of the time has loose ground beef in the case. Many times grass-fed. I haven't looked for that, okay, because I'm off of beef, of course, entirely off of beef. But I'll check it next time I'm in a Whole Food store. By the way, today with the lamb shanks, I had a negative experience with the Whole Food store, okay, in the area. I tried to reach the meat department by phone in that store 3 times during the day, and they left me on hold forever. While on the first occasion that I made a call to Wegmans, they immediately sent me to the meat department. The person who answered the phone was not even regularly in the meat department, but he took a few minutes to pull up some things on the computer screen, and he told me the price of the lamb shanks, and he told me how many they had in stock, and so that's where I went. Okay, I mean, I wanted to go to Whole Foods because I find them generally cheaper than Wegmans and very good quality, but they had lousy service in their meat department, so I ended up going to Wegmans. I don't know how significant that is from a macroeconomic point of view or even a microeconomic point of view, but there it is. Kay says, I scrolled a little, but then completely ruined things. HMOs were the beginning of the fail in healthcare. I'm inclined to agree. Carmen says, it was a pleasure listening to you, Sherry. Thanks for coming. Catherine Tokarska says, I took a healthcare law class many years ago. Fascinating look at history of healthcare in the United States. Insurance companies used to be actually mutual companies. What's the difference between a mutual company and an insurance company? I don't know, but some of them still carry the mutual name.
Hmm.
I know. And Catherine Tokarski says, Tokarska says, haha, K. Catherine Tokarska says, exactly. I've changed insurers twice. No better. The best providers aren't available. The insurance company lists doctors who aren't taking patients at all, but it looks like they have more choices than they really are. Kaiser K is one of the better ones. Yeah, we have found Kaiser to be really, really good in certain respects. Okay, for example, Bonnie had an ear tumor some time ago, and Kaiser brought in somebody who was one of the few doctors who could use the gamma knife procedure here, okay, in DC. He was not a Kaiser doctor. Um, he was a consultant.
He was nominated 8 times.
He was nominated as one of the best doctors, okay, in DC 8 times, but I don't know how relevant actually that is. I think that's more a commercial thing. But we had a situation where this particular doctor normally charged $350 for a consultation. He took Kaiser patients. We had our usual $10 copay. Okay, so the gamma knife was used to cut off the blood supply to the tumor, and the procedure was one, okay, where Bonnie went in, okay, in the morning. And the procedure took about an hour and a half. It had.
And then they gave us lunch.
Yeah, they gave us lunch, but we didn't really particularly like their lunch. So we took a walk down to the hospital cafeteria where they had some very good sushi. And we had some sushi for lunch after that. After we enjoyed our sushi, we went home. And Bonnie, who loves to do the driving in our family, but drove home that same morning perfectly well with absolutely no ill effects. The Kaiser copay for the whole experience was $100. Uh, Absolutely great. The actual bill, which of course we saw, okay, $80,000 for this procedure, and we had $100 copay. All happened in the same morning. It was really great care. No further problems with that tumor over the years. It eventually seems to have disappeared, okay, and got absorbed by the system. In my case, okay, I had an incident where I had a subdural hematoma hit my head coming out of my car. Okay, of course, subdural hematomas are very serious. For a couple of days, okay, I did not notice anything. On the third day, I wasn't actually walking correctly. A friend of mine saw this, okay, and noticed that and said, okay, I had better get to a doctor. Okay, so I went to Kaiser. Okay, my doctor took one look and said, okay, you got to have a CT scan with contrast. He sent me in for a CT scan. It was about 15 minutes away or so, okay, at that time. Okay, I went in for the CT scan. After the CT scan, they rushed me in the hospital. They called in a surgeon from George Washington. Once again, a consultant to Kaiser, not a Kaiser doctor. They operated on me 3:30, okay, in that morning. Okay. Um, 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 just a few hours later, okay, I woke up. Some nurse comes in. Actually, she was an occupational therapist. She had been a consultant at KPMG, but didn't like that work. So she became, okay, an occupational therapist. Okay, and she came into the hospital room to try to give me cognitive tests. And I gave her a lecture, okay, on MMT. After about 15 minutes, okay, of MMT, but she decided, oh, there's no cognitive impairment here. um, at all. Okay, so again, this treatment, okay, very serious operation. I forget what that cost, 60,000 or 70,000. Okay, retail cost. $100 copay. Okay, from Kaiser. Okay, all the follow-up visits. Okay, that were related were free. Wasn't even a Kaiser copay for that visits because they were related to the original thing. I completely recovered, but no ill effects, okay, at all. Okay, I had a rehab period, okay, of a couple of months. Okay, there was some in home types of rehab. We had some visits from people who were teaching me to do this and that. All went well. There were no fees for that. I mean, the whole experience was really close to what you would get in a Medicare for All situation, except there were some payments involved. But it was great service. I think that in the Medicare for All environment, that Kaiser would do extremely well. Nothing would happen to them. They would close their insurance departments, okay, and the marketing departments, and go right ahead. And I think the doctors would be really happier, okay, a lot happier, not to have that part of Kaiser in there, but they would just go on, okay, as an organization. At least I can't speak for Kaiser California. I don't know anything about that. Kaiser on the West Coast. Okay, I did have some minor contacts with Kaiser in Honolulu at one time. We spent a few months there back in 1968. But the Mid-Atlantic division of Kaiser here, in my experience, is excellent, just excellent. Anyway, Catherine Zakarska says, I gambled and lost as far as insurance goes. Yeah, well, we had no choice but to gamble. And I know it's terrible. I've always been a Medicare for All supporter. And I say always, I mean, since the 1960s. Kay says, sick care killed my Scott, and on a charity too. And people wonder why doctors stress me out. Carmen says, Joe, who started the recall thing in California? Can it be done in Florida to bury Death Santis? I don't know whether they have recall, okay, in Florida. I wouldn't be surprised if they did not.
What's that?
I don't know what that is. Okay, but anyway, the recall thing in California was started by right-wingers, okay, and right-wing donors. They perceived an opportunity to take over the governorship, and they acted. And the reason why they have that opportunity is because of the poor management of COVID by Newsom, and the poor management of the fires, and the broken promise when it came to single payer. He ran on single payer, and he's done nothing to try to pass it since he won. Okay, and that's the truth of the matter. A lot of people are very, very angry at him. He has a very good chance of losing the recall at this point. And if you saw last night's show, okay, what you should be doing, of course, is to vote against the recall, because the risk is too high to have a Larry Elder succeed Newsom, and that would absolutely be a disaster. But once you have voted voted no, okay, on the recall, then you have to vote on the second question, and you have to vote for someone who is a supporter of single payer on that second question. And as far as I know, the only supporter of single payer that is running is Dan Kapelovitz. He is the only alternative to Elder who is worth voting for in the California situation, and it's pitiful. He's got 335 followers on Twitter right now. He's not known on social media. The mainstream press, okay, is not going to cover him. We got to do something about that, folks. Jeff Denton says Koch brothers by Obama, one-party system. Communist says to correction. Jeffrey Denton says, but Nick Hanauer is here in Seattle and would not sign our petition for universal health care. That is very good to know, Jeff. Okay, I don't know what's up with Nick, okay, about that. I think it's just awful that he won't sign the petition. And let's see, I scroll down a little bit. And Lana says, how did Sherry get involved, okay, with MMT originally? How did you get involved with MMT originally?
Well, originally, what happened was, around the time that I really started digging into the antitrust stuff, that was when the financial crisis happened. And so then I really started digging into some of, trying to figure out what happened there. And one of the websites that I read a lot was Naked Capitalism. And that's where I first saw your work, Joe. And I actually met you. I don't know if you remember, but Eve Smith came to a meet and greet or, I think in DC one time. And you and I actually talked to each other.
And we talked to each other in that meeting?
Yeah. So anyway, but just briefly.
I remember that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So, so she used to post a lot of stuff about MMT. Well, she probably still does.
I think she still does. I think she still posts when there are posts that come out, okay, of a new economic perspective site.
Mm-hmm.
I think she will often post those, and she picks up some MMT articles from some other areas too. Like she likes by Nathan Tankis's work.
Yeah,
quite a lot.
Yeah, and so I started reading about it, on that website, and then I started looking into it some more, and then of course I found out about RP. I didn't get involved with them right away, but I was trying to figure out some way of trying to get involved, and it's difficult because as an economist, I'm really effectively a microeconomist, not a macro economist. Macro, actually, unfortunately, when I was in grad school, right around the time I started grad school was when macro kind of went crazy, and they started veering away from Keynes and the stuff that I actually liked, and more into the irrational expectations, supply side, and business theory, real business theory and all that. So I just, I didn't want to have anything to do with macro at that point. So, there wasn't really going to be a way for me to really get involved with the economists in MMT because I didn't have any kind of publication or anything. So I got involved with RP for a little bit, but MMT just makes sense to me because I guess for one thing, a lot of economists don't have accounting, but I had accounting before I even took economics. And then I also took a lot of history of thought, and back when I was an undergrad, I even had a comparative, economics class taught by a Ukrainian.
That must have been good.
Yeah, yeah. And he used to make jokes about, and then in 1953, Stalin decided to die, and then he'd chuckle, and then nobody else would laugh. So, anyway, but so I was lucky because I kind of had probably a little broader economics background than a lot of the undergrads did, and so MMT just made sense to me. So I just, since then it's just something I'll never be an MMT economist, but but it's something that I, understand at least at a fairly basic level for an economist.
So thank you for the origin story. That was very good. Lana says, so nice to hear. But Ellis has joined us tonight. Yeah, that was a very happy surprise for me too, Lana.
Me too. That was very nice. Very nice.
I'm so happy to have seen you here, Alice. We have really sorely missed you. And so Jeffrey says, sore spot, the pink pussy hats, the Coke sport, the matching tiki torches. All of it was in the mainstream media because it divides Americans. Hello. Yes, Jeff, I think that's a fair analysis of the situation. Lana says, the more I hear about the Brandeis, the more I like him. He was one hell of a brilliant guy. He really was. And Jeffrey Denton says, Soros bought the pink pussy hats. He did. Nah, not George. Carmen says, I was wondering whatever happened to Ellis George Carlin 2.0. It's been years. Kay says, I thought Nick Hanauer was a single payer. Jeffrey says, I thought Jay Apollo was too. I thought Jay Apollo was also. Where is that socialist? Where did she go? Dolores says, thank you for great discussion. Good night, all. Come back again, Sherry. Come back again, Sherry.
Okay. All right.
Echo that very strongly. Kay says, she is, as far as I know, Jeff, says Kay. And Lisa Girl says, night all. Sherry, you're so informative. And this was a great show. Bravo.
Thank you.
And thank you, Lisa.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Lisa. Kay says, Whole Foods owned by Amazon. Catherine Tokarska says, the mutual company, unlike corporation, policyholders when members received dividends if less claims were paid out than collected in premiums. Kay says, I'm stuck with Medicaid here in Ohio, and it sucks bad, but it is my only choice. Jeffrey Denton says, yeah, no, she won't even publicly acknowledge that whole Washington even exists. That is really quite a scandal, isn't it? Has Kashama Sawant gone after her for that, Jeffrey? I'd be surprised if she hasn't. Carmen says, Kaiser is the way to go. Thanks for the recommendation, Bonnie and Joe. Well, Kaiser is the way to go, okay, if you can get it. It has the Mid-Atlantic program. That Mid-Atlantic program, as far as I know, is in Maryland, Virginia, D.C., of course. I don't know how far it extends actually beyond that. Okay, I don't know if they've gone to North Carolina yet. I think I remember rumblings that they were going to West Virginia pretty soon. I haven't heard whether they're going to Pennsylvania. They've been slow to expand, okay, into different areas. But they've been here now for a very long time, but you don't see them all through the Mid-Atlantic. In other words, why they're not up in New Jersey by now, or Pennsylvania, or down in North Carolina, I don't know. But Kay says, Jeff, that is strange. Catherine Tokarska says, Kaiser in California is best, but unavailable under Medi-Cal unless you had them prior to going on Medi-Cal. Also, I gather Medi-Cal is the Medicaid program, okay, in Kaiser. I'm sorry, in California. And, okay. So it would be available under Medi-Cal if you had them to begin with before you went on to Medi-Cal. Good to know. I even thought about maybe trying to pay straight out for Kaiser for a few months and go back, okay, in Medi-Cal and try and get in through the loophole. Maybe that's a good idea. And Catherine clarifies, okay, Medi-Cal is Medicaid in California. Jeff Denton says, especially when the same Dr. Gerald Friedman approved HR 676 bill that she rewrote in our bill as well. If she actually wanted single-payer health care, she could have had it in her own state and get the ball rolling across the country very easily. We have hundreds of volunteers, but the richest people in the world are fighting us. Yeah, Jeff Bezos. Catherine Tokarska says, I came in late, but Sherry Wise is an attorney. No, Sherry Wise is an economist who works for the Department of Agriculture with accounting training, and economics training. And she's acquired a lot of institutionalist knowledge over the years. Carmen says, Joe, you broke up a bit for a few seconds. I'm sorry, Carmen. I'm not always aware of that, or not able to control it. It depends very much on the strength of the internet, which is probably getting interrupted all over this area now because the storms from the south are starting to come in. And as far as I know, we are still right in the path of the hurricane up here and in D.C. as well. And Northern Virginia, in D.C. In fact, it looks like the Ashburn is right in the center of the predicted path right now. Ashburn, Virginia is where I live. And Lana says, thank you, Sherry. I'm a banker, and the accounting part absolutely made sense immediately.
Yep.
Yeah, the accounting part didn't make a lot of sense to me immediately because I haven't had any accounting training, but it was pretty easy for me to pick up. So that was good. And Jeffrey Denton says, yes, thank you, Sherry. I really learned a lot. And thank you, Joe and Bonnie. And thank you, Jeff. You contributed an awful lot to the discussion, as you always do. And you're always very welcome. Lana says, sorry to hear about the impending storm. Well, Lana, it is what it is. We can't do much about impending storms. All we could do is tighten up everything, which we've done at this point. So we're ready for it. We'll certainly be okay for the next couple of days. Of course, if the power goes out, it'll be a little inconvenient, but we'll have to see. Carmen says, it's still a hurricane, crapola. Okay, Clark Ryan says, thank you all for great discussion. Come back again, Sherry. Great info.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think that's about it, folks. We're through with all the comments. Thank you for staying around. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Can I say one last thing?
Sure, you can say more than one last thing. Go ahead.
The comment about the federal, the Federalist Society.
Yeah.
That made me think that is really one good reason why we ought to have some new law, a new piece of legislation, because the judges, especially Federalist Society judges, are so ingrained in the Borkian kind of thinking that if we had some new legislation, it might kind of give us a chance to better fight antitrust issues in the court. So.
Okay, just to fill you in on a couple of things. What I think we need is, we certainly need to pack the court and restore the balance. Of course, we cannot pack the court under the present situation. It's very, very difficult. We cannot pass a constitutional amendment either. That's even harder. And if we passed one, it would take 7 years, for it to become effective if the ratification process was fast. And there's no guarantee, that it would be. So how do we get around this Supreme Court? I've said this, a number of times on this show. I don't know if you have heard it, Sherry, but Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution has an exceptions clause. The Congress has the power to determine the jurisdiction of the appellate courts. And the chief appellate court in the country, of course, is the Supreme Court. So Congress can pass laws and can have the wording of the exceptions clause in those laws and exclude the Supreme Court and all the appellate courts from any judicial review of those laws. So new campaign finance laws can be passed, if we can get the Democrats to pass them. Those campaign finance laws can be protected from the review of the Supreme Court. If we have those campaign finance laws, it cuts off the flow of money from the donors. It frees up then the Congress people, especially Democratic Congress people, to do more. And the kinds of things that they could do then is to pass the laws that we need, including laws to pack the court and fix that problem. It would be easy to pack it with another 6 justices, to create a democratic advantage of 9-6 on the court, and to disempower the justices who come from the Federalist society. So that's the way to get around it for the short run, the medium run, and in the long run, you do pass a constitutional amendment. In other words, you can do that, but you have to realize it's going to take 7 years or so. So you do these other things first, and then you take your 7 years while you still have the power. So that's the way to get around it. So, folks, I think we're going to say goodnight at this point. We've run for 3 hours. It's been a great one, in my view. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I see there are 6 folks here, the diehards. Thank you very much for still being here. And I'll be back tomorrow night, with another live stream. There's lots and lots to talk about. I don't know if I'll have a guest tomorrow night. On Thursday, Andre Stackhouse, Captain Stack, is coming to have a conversation with me. And on Saturday, Sharif Snuggs is coming to have a conversation with me about his activism and what he's been doing to bring us a Medicare for All system. And he's going to have an awful lot to say. So those are going to be great shows. And then Tuesday, Georgia Davenport's going to be on. And that's going to be, another great show. And we'll be bringing in more and more of the Red Beret folks in as time goes on. Everyone is going to have their turn. And I think that will be very good to get the Red Beret ideas spread around to many, many other people. And that's what I'm about, actually, right now. I really love this movement. It's a bottom-up movement. It's people, who care about other people and who treat them in a decent way. And so I want to feature the Red Berets for some time to come on this show. So Kay says, night all. And Lana says, but nice to see you, Sherry. Good night. Carmen says, Sherry approves. Kay says, sadly, Congress seems to be useless. And Kay says, night all. And Carmen Rena says, night, but lovers and friends. Jeffrey Denton says, good night, Kay. And Kay says, good night, Jeff. And by the way, we love you, Kay. So good night. I'm going to see you again tomorrow.
Night. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Jerry.